welcome to the grand finale of this wonderful Asia and Asians at Harvard conference, specifically our panel, Harvard's Asian Futures, Rethinking Institutional Legacies and Regional Engagement. I'm Jay Rosengard. I teach at the Harvard Kennedy School, where I'm also the director of the Indonesian Public Policy Program, and at the Asia Center, I'm the director of the Harvard Thai Studies Program. And the preceding conference panels have reflected on Harvard's longstanding reciprocal relationships with Asia that have shaped scholarship, policymaking, and cultural life both on our campus and across the region. They have illuminated history by showcasing pivotal encounters, initiatives, and collaborations linking Harvard and Asia since the late 19th century, sometimes earlier, by celebrating Asian students, faculty, and visitors whose work has redefined disciplines and campus culture, and by critically examining Harvard's role in Asian policymaking, development, and institution building, acknowledging both successes and shortcomings. So it's been somewhat therapeutic for us at Harvard as well to reflect on the good, the bad, the ugly over the last couple of hundred years. This panel will look at the past with an eye to the future by envisioning new equitable collaborations that broaden Asia-related teaching, research, and public engagement at Harvard. We have assembled a remarkable panel here, but to maximize presentation and discussion time, I will just introduce our esteemed panelists by their title. Their full biographies are listed both in the pamphlet and online. So they will also speak in the order they're sitting. So start with Joseph Esherick, Emeritus Professor of Modern Chinese History, University of California, San Diego, UCSD, yes, who will discuss studying China at Harvard in the 1960s. Then we have William P. Alford, Jerome A. and Joan L. Cohen Professor of Law, Director of the East Asian Legal Studies Program, and Chair of the Harvard Law School Project on Disability, who will examine impact taking many forms. Next, we have Robert Albrecht, Master of Architecture candidate, Department of Architecture, Harvard University GSD, Graduate School of Design, who will talk about exporting expertise, institutionalizing planning, education in Southeast Asia. Then we have Ingrid Ahlgren, Curator of Oceanic Collections, Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Research Associate, Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History, who will focus on recovering voices using museum collections to address institutional histories. And last but not least, we have Michael Pewitt, Victor and William Fung Foundation, Director of the Harvard University Asia Center and the host of this conference, Walter C. Klein, Professor of Chinese History and Anthropology at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and a Harvard College professor who will explore Harvard and the study of Southeast Asia. So without further ado, we'll start with Joseph, and we will try to manage our time well so that we have enough time for a dialogue. The floor is yours.
You can cut me off. In the 1970s, while finishing up my graduate work at UC Berkeley, I wrote a piece entitled Harvard on China, The Apologetics of Imperialism. And when I was approached to attend this conference, I was asked to reflect on this essay, which was a critique of John Fairbank and what came to be known as the Western impact and Chinese response approach to modern Chinese history. And I understand that a number of you have been forced to consume this, and it is meant to be a healthy critique of Harvard in those days. I was a member of the Harvard class of 1964. So I graduated 60 years ago. In fact, I came to Harvard more than 60 years ago. My Harvard years were precisely the Kennedy years. I was here from the election of 1960 to the assassination in Dallas. And in my freshman year, I took the intro to Econ, for which John Kenneth Galbraith lectured on developmental economics. And I was so inspired that I briefly, ever so briefly, majored in economics. And I thought of studying developmental economics with Galbraith. Unfortunately, he went off to become ambassador to India. And at roughly the same time, Suzanne and Lloyd Rudolph departed Harvard for Chicago. And so effectively, the study of India was eliminated from the Harvard curriculum. And I decided to study China. The basic idea in those days was, certainly for me, was I wanted to study something different, something not like myself, a dangerous old man who is now going to reflect on the past. And I have learned from the many fine papers in this conference that the archives tell of a Harvard that I did not experience. And I take that to be a defect of my own memory, but perhaps to some degree of the experience of the ordinary Harvard undergraduate. I recently thought back about that experience of abandoning India for China, two large countries that have had very different but perhaps complementary paths to modernity, and how different it would have been if I had studied India rather than China. I, of course, came to China from the famous rice paddies course, in which the crucial comparison to be made was between China and Japan. Fairbank and Reischauer co-taught that course. Reischauer, of course, later went off to become ambassador to Japan, another data point in our changing world. Harvard was a very different place in those days. And it's important to recognize how far time has changed this school. Harvard was then all male. There were Radcliffe girls, as they were known, who took classes with us, but they lived separately and they ate in their own dorms. There were hardly any East or South Asian students at all. And I've learned from the archives that, there were East and South Asian students here, but we didn't meet them. Somehow that was the way in which people separated themselves in dorms or whatever. I audited courses even from Henry Kissinger. So I wasn't exclusively in the liberal side of Harvard in those days. And the liberal side, as far as China was concerned, was represented by John Fairbank, who was for recognizing what was called Red China in those days. After I became, during my Harvard years, I I think perhaps the most formative educational experience was with this Akira Irie in my junior tutorial. Irie led us through the great books of Asian history and civilization, from Sima Qian to Reischauer on Tang visitors to China. And we wrote weekly responses to these readings, and I thought the purpose of a Harvard education was you smash the books, you critique them as much as you possibly can. And I looked up one day at this pain expression on Irie's face, and he said, don't you have anything good to say about these books that he had so carefully selected for us? It wasn't really that I didn't have anything good to say. I mean, it was just that was the nature of Harvard in those days. You critique everything, and nobody takes it personally. After Harvard, I spent a year in Hong Kong and posed as a journalist in Vietnam, where I went for my vacations, and then went to Berkeley. And it was at that point that I wrote the Harvard on China essay. It was clear from my Harvard years that if I continued to study with Fairbank, I was going to be another cog in the China's response to the West world. And I thought I had pretty much learned what I could learn about China's response to the West, and I wanted something a little bit different. Joseph Levinson was then alive, and he was the one I went to study with. During my first year of dissertation research, I got a telegram from Fred Wakeman that Levinson had passed away in a canoeing accident, and Wakeman was to take over my dissertation advising. My first academic job was at the University of Oregon, and I moved to San Diego in 1990. And for the first time, I had an experience to actually direct graduate students. It was a very different world then from Harvard in the 1960s. At Harvard, all the grads were white males, and I note that not to condemn them. I mean, they included Andy Nathan, Paul Cohen, James Pusey, Orville Schell. These were not minor intellects, and they contributed greatly to the China field, but they were all male and all white male. And at UCSD, like the students at Harvard today, there was a mix of Asians and Americans, and a mix of males and females. And I found that much more congenial and much more productive. The males and females, the Chinese and the Americans all learned from each other. They had something that the other lacked. And it may have begun by the Chinese helping the Americans read their sources and the Americans helping the Chinese write their papers. But it became much deeper than that and much more profound. In my lifetime, the universities of the U.S., even including Harvard, have come a long way from my day. No longer all male, no longer there are many women, there are many Asians, both East Asian and South Asian. And I have been impressed exceptionally by the papers that have been delivered here in this conference. But I also have had a certain set of queries and conundrums in my mind that this doesn't sound like the Asia I learned about. And is this just a fault of my memory? Or is it the fact that the archives don't completely reflect the reality that they're supposed to? And as one who has worked in both oral history and necessarily of memory and archival work, I wrestle with that question all the time, and I suggest that others might wrestle with it too. One of the aspects of the wonderful papers that have been delivered today, or these last few days, is that by and large, and there were important exceptions, people have studied their own cultures and written about their own cultures and used the archives of their own languages. And to an extent, that seems to me to represent a retreat into our tribal homes. And that, frankly, bothers me. It's not that I would advocate a return to the Harvard of the 1960s. Certainly, we've gotten beyond that and all the dangers that that entails. But do we want completely to avoid offending other members of our tribes or other members of tribes that we much respect, and avoid all sharp critiques of the type that Erie was so discomforted by? How can we form a new academics that tolerates sharp criticism but doesn't take it seriously, that listens to others and truly listens to others? I'm so put off by contemporary debates in which people are screaming at each other and talking past each other. That doesn't in general happen in academia, but it does sometimes happen on US campuses. And it's a sorry thing to say. I grew up in the Vietnam War era of teach-ins where we actually taught each other about what was going on in the world and listened to each other. And I hope that somehow we can recover that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want to start by commending the Asia Center for doing this conference and for its work in general. It's filled many important substantive gaps here at Harvard, most notably bringing to our attention in such important ways parts of Asia that were previously understudied, still understudied to be sure at Harvard, Southeast Asia in particular, but also showing how issues that might have been focused on in a single country before and therefore thought distinctive to that country, in fact, have resonance across the region, but also by showing how ideas transform as they move from place to place. But just as the Asia Center has helped us substantively knit together the region, it's also done something similar for the university. So we all know Harvard is a rather fragmented place. There's a Chinese saying, "Duli Wangguo," which means 10,000 independent kingdoms, and that sort of describes Harvard. And so in ways that are very impressive, Michael, and before him, James Robson, and Tenzin, who is the world's most patient administrator, at least the most patient person I've ever met. Sugata and others have done that, and the conference really demonstrates that. So I was asked to speak about Harvard's impact on institutions in Asia, and obviously we had a lot of that already. It's been terrific. I think the question of impact is a complicated one in a lot of ways, and variegated, not only because we're dealing with, after all, something like 60% of the human race and 12 schools here at Harvard, but also because impact is transmitted in a variety of ways through, in the case of a university, through students, through faculty, through ideas, through convening power, through reputation, and so forth. Also, impact manifests itself in a variety of ways through government, through opposition, through courts, through civil society, through academia in Asia itself. And impact has a variety of consequences, as we've heard. Well, we hope, those of us who teach here are invested in the place, hope that the impact is beneficial by and large. Our commitment to be truth-seeking compels that we acknowledge the ways in which it has not always been that case. And the previous panel, Professor Lee and Nia and Eleanor showed this very powerfully indeed. And by the way, it's so impressive to have students presenting. This is great. So I'm going to, for reasons of time, focus very briefly on 4 individuals, 4 graduates, who I think exemplify ways in which Harvard's had an impact in Asia, not just East Asia, and 4 ideas put forward through Harvard faculty or senior staff. I easily could have picked a myriad of other individuals, and I'd be happy in the Q&A to answer questions, go into more depth. Indeed, after listening to the last panel, I think what I have is a little bit superficial or more. But anyway, 4 people, 4 graduates, and then 4 ideas. So graduates. So not our typical graduate, to be sure, but Masako Wada, graduated from Harvard College, magna cum laude, in 1985. She then earned one of the highest scores in the Japanese Foreign Ministry entrance exam. Typically only 1 out of 20 people would pass. Even within that small realm, she was one of the tops. The ministry saw her as enormously promising, arranged for her to go to Oxford for further study. To be sure, though, her promising diplomatic career got cut short, but she had a good reason, good excuse. She became first the crown princess and now the empress. But I think it's fair to say that the example that she has set and the way she has comported herself and dealt with her responsibilities as the first internationally educated person to hold those positions has had arguably even more force than a more typical diplomatic career might have had, made more of an impact both in Japan and abroad. And as Professor Fa, whose talk was great yesterday, and myself and others have had the privilege of experiencing firsthand through conversations being received by her and her husband, it remains very evident that what imprint a Harvard education had on her with her intellect and her inquisitiveness. The next 2 individuals are 2 of my classmates from Harvard Law School, worth mentioning because they are such a interesting matched pair, although they both probably not like to be referred to that way. So as a third-year student at Harvard Law School, I sat next to Ma-Ying Zhou, who's over there, who later became Minister of Justice, Mayor of Taipei, and subsequently President of the Republic of China on Taiwan. Yes, Freudian slip there. We stayed in constant contact over the years, and I had the privilege of serving as his official host when he came to visit Harvard while he was president. Now, as I tell my US students, you should befriend our international students so that you can learn and grow and be a better person. But if you're not interested in learning and growing and being a better person, if the fellow sitting next to you or the woman sitting next to you became president of their country, you sure wish you had been nice to them when they were students. Anyway, soon after I got to know him, I also got to know Liu Sholian, who in time would become a vice president of the Republic of China on Taiwan, and the first woman and the first member of the opposition to hold that role. Now, Harvard had an enormous impact on both of them substantively and instrumentally in enabling these two fiercely intelligent people to make their very different historic imprints on Taiwan. Ma returned there armed with a lawyerly savvy to use what is called strategic ambiguity, sort of a lack of clarity about the legal status of Taiwan, to sort of buy time in Taiwan's dealings with the PRC, while it's also clear that his Harvard doctorate, that imprimatur, helped advance his political career through his credibility it gave him. Liu, on the other hand, returned to the late 1970s to Taiwan, which was then quite repressive, even more convinced than she had been before of the necessity, for reasons of self-determination, for Taiwan to become independent. And she was able only to have a political career, and indeed probably even just to survive, to keep living, because after being imprisoned in 1979 for her political activity, and she spent 5 long years in prison and had cancer, she was able to secure her freedom partly through the interventions of Ma-Ying Zhou, at the behest of our common teacher, all three of us, Jerome Cohen, who recently sadly passed away, who convinced Ma that it would be very important to help spare her from prison. Now, importantly, for the purposes of this conference, these two individuals each drew very different lessons from their time here, and each in their political life back in Taiwan have advocated things that are very different, really diametrically opposed in terms of engaging with China versus declaring independence. But in a way, that's how it should be. That our job, I think, is not to indoctrinate students, but to help expose them to ideas and have them take them where they will. Finally, my fourth example among people is Nilun Thairushilvan, who is from Sri Lanka, who after graduating from the law school endeavored to bridge ethnic divides in his native Sri Lanka through civil society, and as director of the Colombo-based International Center for Ethnic Studies. Now, tragically, he was assassinated, he was bombed and killed at age 55, but he left a legacy of trying to redress those kinds of enormous challenges which really divide so many societies around the world, in part by employing ideas he learned here about constitutionalism, and his life experience, his courage, his sacrifice clearly live on. Now, though, beyond our graduates and the living embodiment of Harvard's impact in Asia, our faculty and professional staff also have had a very significant impact. Again, just a few examples. I could give many, many more. So one is the late Joseph Nye, who passed away earlier this year, and in particular, his idea of soft power. Now, the notion that governments have resources other than the material is certainly not new with Joseph Nye, but the thoughtfulness with which he developed and conveyed this idea together with the Harvard platform, which he did it, had great force throughout the region. For example, being just one illustration, being credited with the idea in Singapore of setting up something like Speaker's Corner as a way to sort of cultivate, whether deeply felt or not, the image of openness. Now, one might make a similar point regarding impact with the case of Claudia Goldin, Nobel laureate in economics, to, again, give but one illustration, interests of time. Her work has had an enormous impact on government and society in Korea. Korea is very focused on what's called the demographic cliff, basically 0.72 or so a child per couple in Seoul, whereas the replacement norm is supposed to be 2.1. So what was part of her impact? It was documenting empirically in ways that had consequence in the Korean government that one major factor in the low birth rate was that in families where both men and women worked outside of the home, women still worked in the home at least 3 hours more a day, right? And so if, as the government was trying to do, you want to grow the population, maybe that would be something to be mindful of. A third example of the power of ideas coming out of Harvard is our colleague Howard Gardner of the Graduate School of Education. Now, you might think at first this is sort of removed from governmental institutions, but there's no mistaking the way that Howard, in his landmark work on multiple intelligences, among other things, has had a profound impact on education ministries and public education in general across the region, and notably in Thailand, India, Japan, and elsewhere. And this is so, even if, as Howard recently playfully recounted to me, he would meet the occasional, these sort of my rendition of what he told me, the occasional mother in China and elsewhere who would say, oh, 8 intelligences, that's great. I'd like my son to have all 8 as soon as possible. Fourth, and finally, I want to mention my colleague, Dr. Cui-Feng Ming, in the Harvard Law School Project on Disability. She's our director for East Asia. Feng Ming is a native of China, now in her 18th year at Harvard Law School, and she and others in our project have done extraordinary work in advancing the idea of a social model of disability, which I'll explain briefly in a moment, in China, in Korea, to some degree in the Philippines, in Vietnam, and elsewhere in the region. Basically, the medical model of disability sort of assumes if somebody is disabled, that's sort of their misfortune in life and up to them to do whatever they can to address it. A social model says, well, part of it is how society is constructed, and that if we were trying to be imaginative in reconstructing society, we might provide much greater access to more people. Think, for example, of curb cuts. Think, for example, of computers that can read out what's on them to people who have sight impairments. Feng Ming has been extraordinary in taking this idea. She did not originate it, but in taking the idea and figuring out how to adapt it so as to make the idea accessible in the parts of East Asia where she's worked, doing this both through the power of her intellect and through her example as a woman from China with physical disability, coming with the Harvard name card, which clearly opened a lot of doors. Now, I could, if we had more time, offer examples of other ways in which there's been a Harvard impact. Think of Harvard faculty who've been directly involved. And Sugata served in Parliament. That was very important, I think. Or Harvard faculty and staff who have been in government service here. Nick Burns, the great Nick Burns, was recently mentioned. You think of the university's convening power. And these days, and I really want to stress this in particular, by the example that Harvard sets of courage and commitment to serious academic values in the face of enormous governmental and other pressures, an example that has been much and very favorably remarked upon by alumni from really throughout the world, but certainly throughout Asia. The weekend that the administration said it might, back in May, it might prohibit Harvard from having international students, I got emails from students, from graduates of our school across the world, all 6 continents, not Antarctica, of course, but every other continent. How can I help? What can we do? How can we support you? So very important and very moving. So let me close, since I'm already a minute or two over my time, with 5 short, quick lessons looking to the future. Jay said we can't just look at the past. So short, quick lessons. The first, as I hope I've illustrated, is that Harvard's impact on institutions takes a variety of forms and obviously will in the future. Second is that the views of our graduates and the kind of positions they occupy really run a spectrum from pillars of the establishment to opposition leaders to those who are stepping out of conventional politics and really want to reimagine the world and remake society. And there's a sort of a parallel to the type of ideas, range of ideas from our faculty. And again, that's really, I think, how it should be. A third is to stress the importance in engaging of openness to learning, those of us who are here, and to doing so on a plane of equality. When I teach about China, I want the students obviously to learn something about China, but I want them to use that opportunity to reflect back on our society. Here are our assumptions, here are why we do what we do, and so forth. Fourth, even as we celebrate the successes that the universities had, I think we need to recognize that our graduates may very well choose to take things in their own direction and adapt and transmute ideas, and that's, again, their prerogative and how it should be. And finally, fifth, as I was saying a moment ago, how we go about our own activity here, how we comport ourselves, particularly in these very difficult times, is itself a very important and I think enduring form of impact. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm Robin. I'm a Master of Architecture student at the GSD. And today I'm gonna present about the involvement at Harvard's Graduate School of Design in setting up Southeast Asia's first planning program at the Bandung Institute of Technology in the late 1950s and early 1960s. I was really interested in this research because myself, I'm originally from Germany, and then I lived in Hong Kong for 6 years before coming to the GSD, so I lived in different places. And I was interested to see how the knowledge that was taught at the GSD was sort of applied, transformed to a different context, and how ideas between different places traveled. But then also expanding that question, not just looking at how did the knowledge kind of move from Harvard to somewhere else, but also what was the knowledge that was taught at Harvard at the time, which also was a translation from a different context. So it's kind of a travel of ideas and transformation in the process between different places, context, and continents. I conducted this research as part of a fellowship at the British Architectural Library, specifically looking into a GSD faculty, Jacqueline Turbot, who's known as the mother of modern urban design. And she was one of the GSD experts who was involved in setting up that program in Indonesia. I want to start looking at this. I actually have quite a lot of slides, but they're mostly to set up a kind of diagram for this talk, to kind of set up a framework to talk about the engagement of Harvard or of the GSD in Indonesia. And so I think the first thing I was interested to look at is who was the host institution of that program. And what was chosen was the school, or the Bandung Institute of Technology in Indonesia. The Bandung Institute of Technology hosted Indonesia's oldest architecture program at the time already, so I think that's why it was chosen as a school to also host a planning program, specifically because the GSD's approach to planning education at the time and the people who were involved, including Jacqueline Turbot, was really on the design side of planning, not just the policy and economic side of it. And then we have a group of foreign experts, including Jacqueline Turbot and other GSD faculty who were involved as foreign experts to go to Indonesia and set up the program, but also were involved in teaching faculty at Harvard and also at other schools in North America and in Europe in educating the first generation of local Indonesian faculty. So there was kind of a two-sided process of both sending experts to Indonesia to set up the program, but also to work on educating the first generation of Indonesian planning faculty. So Harvard then was that foreign support institution that enabled that and worked on like these two aspects of sending experts and educating faculty. And faculty were not just educated at Harvard, but also other institutions. So if I make that into kind of a simple diagram, we get kind of the Harvard side, and I made that in this crimson color, and then the Bandung side, which I colored blue. If we put that on a timeline, we can divide it both temporally, but also by different places, one in North America and one in Indonesia. And of course, this involvement of the United Nations, the program was the United Nations initiative, and the involvement of that was linked to, of course, the independence of Indonesia in the second half of the 1940s. And then I think also with the expulsion of Dutch nationals in the 1950s. Which led to a lack of planning professionals in Indonesia at the time. A lot of the writing about planning and architecture in Indonesia was in Dutch, like this example from Van Romont, who was the head of the architecture school at the Bandung Institute of Technology at the time. But also, if we look in some other documents, we can see this kind of lack of planning professionals in the country, with only 25 qualified planners and 10 architects for the whole country. The whole involvement of Harvard at Bandung lasted for about 6 years, from 1959 to 1965, and really started with the first two faculty members, Martin Meyerson and William Döbeler, to go to Indonesia to set up the program and kind of lay the groundwork of the school, and kind of establish the planning program, which really happened in a period of about 9 months in 1959, so that was a very fast process. And also during that time, local faculty were selected to be trained in overseas institutions and then become the first generation of local faculty at Bandung. Of course, this meant that in the immediate years after starting the school, there was a lack of faculty to teach, so more foreign experts were sent to Indonesia to teach in the school in its founding years, before that first generation of planning faculty joined the school in 1961. So they were educated abroad for about 2 years. And then at the same time, while they were educated, the planning program was already starting. Jacqueline Turvitt was the third person to join as a foreign expert in Indonesia and stayed there for about half a year. But her involvement with the school and with educating people spanned about a decade further beyond that. And then there were other Harvard faculty who were involved in that program. And then in 1969 was when the Indonesian faculty returned to take up some of the teaching positions, and the role of foreign experts was slowly phased out. The school and program continue until today, but in different versions than, of course, what it was started in the 1960s. I want to look at 3 aspects. One is which institutions were involved, what considerations shaped the school, kind of more looking at the curriculum, and also how ideas at Harvard traveled to there. And then I think lastly, what I find really interesting is how were teachers educated and what were the exchanges within that. So the initiator of the program was the United Nations, and it was overseen by the Technical Assistance Board of the Office of the Resident Representative in Indonesia. But it was really more of a reporting role where the foreign experts kind of reported to the United Nations of what is happening, as well as the United Nations providing funding for that program. And there was a lot of I think, independence in what is the kind of curriculum that is taught at the school and how is that shaped. Which brings us back to the GSD. Of course, if we think about what part of the GSD curriculum maybe traveled to Indonesia, of course, I want to understand what was happening in planning and design education at the GSD at the time. The dean at the time was Luis Sert, who is a Spanish or Catalonian architect and urban planner, who was known as a convener of the CIAM Congress, which was a mostly European Congress in modernism in architecture and urban planning, who was appointed dean at the GSD in 1953, and who was one of the so-called like super deans who had a lot of flexibility in how they arrange the programming and the teaching and curriculum at the school, because it wasn't like fractured into the dean and then several departments, but really the dean kind of controlling everything. And he really brought a vision to the school, especially as it related to planning, that design is really important in the way planning is taught, not just the policy and economic side of it. And one of the people who were hired at the time was Jacqueline Turbot, who I already said was known as the mother of modern urban design, who also believed in this vision, this kind of modernist vision of urban design education as kind of this design aspect on the urban scale in how cities are planned. Who was then, I think, first invited to give lectures at the GSD that focus on kind of more the human aspect of inhabitation in the city. And then in 1956 was appointed an assistant professor of city planning. While she stayed in Indonesia, there was a lot of kind of exchange between the GSD and what is happening at the school. And this letter, I think, is really interesting because it talks about the kind of difficulties and challenges and also progress record of what's happening in the school, where she describes that the school is in doldrums, that there's a good groundwork, but, and I'm quoting that the students are better than the faculty at the time. And then describes kind of what are the other people who are there. There were not only Harvard faculty at the school, there were also people through other programs, such as a Swiss person called Walter Hansinger, who was part of a University of Kentucky team. And then also a kind of change in the other people who were teaching at the school, and a kind of shift from Dutch nationals who were teaching and leading that to both other foreign experts, but also to Indonesians who are educated abroad and are returning to Indonesia to take up teaching and leadership roles at the school. What considerations shaped the school, and what is the kind of curriculum that was set up and exported to Indonesia in the founding years of that program? So here we're really looking at the kind of initial period in the 1960s. And one of the first questions was, of course, where's the school? And I already said that it's partly chosen to be at the Bandung Institute of Technology because it housed already Indonesia's oldest and most established architecture program. And since planning was to be positioned as a discipline where design is very important, I think that was a choice for the school at Bandung. Then, of course, there was a question of who are the students who are we educating, and there were different scenarios that were kind of played with. One was, do we do a kind of bachelor degree where people study it for 5 years? Do we do a graduate degree, or are we only educating people who are already working in national, regional, and municipal administrations and kind of do a sort of secondary education in planning and the design aspect of planning? Eventually, undergraduate degree was chosen. That's 5 years long. And if we look at the curriculum, this is, of course, a very comprehensive list. What's immediately noticeable is that every semester has design courses, or specifically studio courses, where students were not just asked to learn the technical aspect of planning, but also very specifically the graphic and design aspect of planning. I think that's one of the most immediate exports from the GSD, where it was this idea of urban design and urban planning that came with the Europeans who came to the GSD in the 1950s, and then the ideas or the kind of DNA of that idea was further brought to the program in Indonesia. And I think that's quite interesting to see these continuities across different contexts. And also a kind of way how ideas of modernism traveled, not just through maybe people, not just through plans and buildings that were built in different places, but also through people at specific institutions at specific times who shaped that dialogue. Some other questions were, of course, what is a library? Where do teaching materials come from? But also, how is maybe knowledge that is learned abroad made relevant to the Indonesian context? I, just for time reasons, going to skip this a little bit. And then, of course, a lot of, okay, perfect. And then, of course, some other questions on faculty, research, income, and teaching materials. But to come to the last part, and I have about 2 minutes left. How were teachers educated? And as I already said, I conducted this research as an archival research in London. And what was really interesting is that within Jacqueline Turbert's archive, there were a lot of term papers and correspondences with one student specifically, Tan Xuan, who was an Indonesian student educated at Harvard. And it was kind of interesting to trace what are the sort of how people were educated, and then how did the things that they learned travel with them. One thing that's interesting is that there were a lot of term papers in the archive that applied knowledge at Harvard to Indonesian situations, like there's some analysis of the population problem in Java, or some aspects of the Indonesian overall development plan. And the idea was also that these term papers then become part of the initial teaching material at Bandung. Also, there was a lot of care given to what are the students who are staying in the US doing during the stay, not just in school, but also this is about kind of organizing summer programs where they visit different cities and projects, and the kind of reference letters that were written to enable and facilitate that, and the kind of administrative support that was given to that. Also interesting here that that student specifically was the best student of his class at Harvard in that year, only receiving B pluses and A minus, kind of before grade inflation, I guess. But also like kind of anecdotes like, oh, that student doesn't present any of the problems associated typically with foreign students. And then almost the last slide, before people were sent back to Indonesia to take up the teaching positions, all the Indonesian students who studied in North America met at Harvard for a weekend conference where they discussed what have they learned, how to apply it, what are the problems, and kind of met with the people, the foreign experts who already taught in Indonesia with the future generation of faculty to sort of plan what's going to happen in the school, a kind of exit interview of their time in the US. Skipping through some of this, the exchanges between Jacqueline Turbot and Tan Xuan continued much later into the late 1960s, and there were different exchanges, offers for help that she offered to the school even way beyond her engagement with the school finished, and way beyond that the Indonesian faculty took up the teaching roles. But then also it's interesting to see that, for example, for the student Tan Xuan in the 1980s, he seemed to have moved on to Singapore and became a planner at the Housing and Development Board. Sort of also that although there were these people very specifically educated for teaching roles in Indonesia, as time and history went on, not everyone stayed there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say I'm incredibly humbled and grateful to be here. This is not a space where I would normally be speaking, I think. And so I think there are a few areas where I could contribute in other ways, thinking about, China and Taiwan and dollar diplomacy in the Pacific Islands, or Indo-Fijian relations in Fiji. But today I'm going to talk about the Philippines. And why that is a bit strange is I currently serve as the curator for the Oceanic collections at the Harvard Peabody Museum. And sort of classically, or across many museums, that typically Oceania we define as the Pacific Islands and Australia. So, but many of our items from over 100 years ago or so were classified from Southeast Asia, island Southeast Asia, were classified as being within Oceania. And we have no curator for all of Asia, or Africa, by the way, at the Harvard Peabody Museum. And so occasionally things sort of fall down the hill. So I just want to have a disclaimer that says, I am not here to represent Philippine voices. I am not here to talk about, people's opinions on those things. I'm here to talk about this journey of what it means to engage with communities, with archives, and there's a lot I could speak about, and I will. Eleanor, I'm so grateful that Eleanor was here. She touched upon this history of the Philippines-American War, the colonization of the Philippines, and that was a stepping off point for me in some ways, but I really hope, pending time, Jay, just, I'm not known.
I'll give you a warning.
I'm not known for being brief, so I am going to do my best. So I really want to talk about a few things, but really about whose voices, who are we listening to? And I think it's really evocative what you said, and I don't know if you meant it to be evocative, Joseph, but you saying like, this is not the Asia that I learned, right? I think there's a lot to unpack there. And I think it's really interesting. I just want to note that most of this project, again, since I don't have expertise in Southeast Asia, I didn't study it. So it's certainly not the Asia I learned since I didn't learn it. But this really came to the forefront when I was working with a student, Kata Janetta. She goes by a few different names. But she's here. She was a master's student in the Museum Studies program. I was asked to be a reader for her project. And she was looking across museums, looking at digital representation of Filipinos and some of the damage that has been done regarding sort of the categorization and description and the unfair bias that's in museum cataloging. And so I just want to give her a shout out here. She was not working only at the Harvard Peabody Museum, but that was one of the places, and she kind of particularly was interested in photographs. So in the process of working with her, there was a really educational moment for me regarding the Philippines and the history of American colonization in the Philippines. And so a lot of my work looks at provenance, so looking back at the chain of custody, how things were collected, why and when, context, motivations, as well as engaging with descendants today regarding the use and the interpretation of those items. So it's really interesting for me to learn regarding the Philippines collections that was really only a few dozen items in the museum until, ding, 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 1900, around that time, which will ring bells for those of you that are paying attention to Eleanor's presentation regarding the Philippines-American War, the United States being in that region. And by 1920, as these things started to come in, there were more than 3,000 cultural heritage items, 5,000 photographs. And you can see here, I only learned just yesterday, actually, about this photographic exhibition that went up. And I'd love for a student to look into this if anyone wants to. Those names might be familiar. The Governor General's Vision, William Cameron Forbes, and his photographs, and some of Worcester's photographs as well. The famous Igorot sequence is at the top, and that's a study in and of itself. I will talk about this flag at the end. But as we sort of briefly look back at the Philippines, the Americans' engagement in the Philippines, I want to talk about Harvard's role and anthropology's role in the region. And Harvard is highly implicated in the history of engagement there. And really, anthropology was employed and deployed in the region. So many of you know about this history, so I won't dive into it, but you can research it on your own. But there's a few sort of commissions that came out. President at the time, McKinley, does that sound right? He was quite hesitant whether or not to go into the Philippines, right, because of the glaring hypocrisy of an independent United States going into and becoming a colonizer. And there's several sort of commissions that come forward over the next few years. Of note will be this final one here, the Ethnological Survey and the Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes, who I was asking the question about connections with Native American sort of things, so tribes, classifications, but also the term Bureau of Tribes should ring some bells, right? So I won't stay on this for very long, but I just wanted to highlight that when McKinley and then Roosevelt afterwards were deciding to go into the Philippines, they realized that they knew very little about the Philippines. They were relying on a lot of Spanish documents and understandings. And so one of the things they did was said, science, we are going to employ science. And we were going to go and we were going to study these people. We were going to survey them. And we were going to figure out, classify them, figure out how to best rule them, assimilate, et cetera, et cetera. And who did the top government officials hire? Of course, would be the top scientists of the day, which we all know are here at Harvard. So all of these people that are highlighted in red here are all Harvard graduates, worked at Harvard, were staff, and they were all implicated and were many of the people that actually led these surveys and were writing up these reports. I just love tying in that tropical civilization class or something. You can see sort of the some of the quotes there on the right from the report of the committee about America's first serious attempt to develop an Anglo-Saxon civilization in the tropics and among non-Aryan people. Exciting time. I should say, I will apologize. There are some images and there are some quotes and there is some terminology in here that refer and describe Filipinos. That I think many Filipinos would not say are accurate or fair representations of them today. So I just want to sort of give that warning and say that I'm not endorsing it, but I am using those terms and highlighting those photographs and those quotes so that we can be transparent about that history as we move forward. So as the ethnological survey went out, there were many people that were simply young graduates that actually went to the same, that met many Harvard people, and similar to that principle, were basically just said, you seem like a great young chap. We're gonna send you out into the Philippines to survey these people. What came back as a result was a really confusing set of different tribes, tribal communities, and a very simplification of the story is that government officials said, that's far too complicated for us. We just want to figure out how to govern these people militarily and then civically. So if you could simplify that down, and through the process, you get this kind of compression of very diverse linguistic cultural communities being lumped into terms and groups like Igorot or Moro, a particularly controversial one, Visayan, and of course, another controversial one, Negrito. And this is of interest to me as it relates to collections. Well, first I should note that this is around the same time. It was the result of these surveys that led to the creation of the quote-unquote Moro province in 1903, which were predominantly non-Christian communities. And you can see in the bottom left here that many of them were actually also brought for the World's Fair in St. Louis. 1904, and so many of these different groups of Moros, at least here, they are given a more identification there. And so when Roosevelt actually says that we are now at peace with the Philippines, he very specifically in his speech says, except those people, that certain set of people, which is a very large group of people. I'm interested in this as it relates to collections because Frederick Ward Putnam was the director of the Peabody Museum at the time, went on to become the father of American anthropology, or so he is so called. And you saw the beginning of that quote earlier. And he goes on, he's writing to William Cameron Forbes and says, can you get us some stuff? Okay, we need stuff because we want to fill our museum so that we can undertake our anthropological studies, so we can become the foremost museum. Oh, Lord. And as a result, he does this and reaches out to many other people that were military leaders, that were historians, scientists, and these are accession cards. This is lots of the material that comes in that represents those 3,000 items, essentially. I may skip through this, but if anyone wants to ask afterwards, we do have the Peabody Museums. All of their collections are publicly available online to look at. But for those of you that worked in museums, usually what happens is things come in a ledger, and you have one very simple line that gives you minimal information, and that is fed into our database, which feeds and pumps out into our public database. And there are some pretty big issues with that. For instance, here you can see the culture group is Philippines Negrito. There's no indigenous terms. There's no specificities. In the case of this one, this flag, which is most certainly from around 1899, 1900, the earliest Filipino flag, you can see it was listed in the card originally adopted during the Aguinaldo insurrection, a term that I think most people would revise today to be revolution. But you can see that still remains in our database today. So Kata and I actually wrote a paper about it. So if you want to sort of learn a little bit about that accumulation and how the museum is implicated in the ongoing erasure of Filipino identities, you can read that article. And what I wanted to share in this slide, at least, is that you see all these tags and these notes on the right. A lot of these are in archives that I discovered through the process that are not easy to find, and so we call them the hidden archives. In reality, we have indigenous terms for these things, we have uses, we have a lot of descriptions. There may still be problems with them, but there's a lot of information there, okay? And that information is not currently available to the public. And in the article, we talk specifically about what it means to look deep into archives and discover what the truth is behind some of these collections, including this brass beetle nut box, which, spoiler alert for the article, is really a war trophy. So we were able to track down who this belongs to, which is a Datu, which is a chief, Datu Mustafa. And it actually is traced back to his murder in around 1904, 05, I believe it is. None of that is documented or put on our website. So now, in my final couple minutes, I want to talk about looking forward, since that's what we're talking about here, right? So there's this fascinating academic look at archives, right? That's what we do. We're sort of digging into archives, studying history. But what now? There's a lot of work that continues and needs to be done. Some of the work that I had started with some students and some other people has since been paused due to financial things, the sky falling here at Harvard. But taking this information and then adding it into our database and looking up and finding out what groups do these actually belong to? What are their indigenous terms? How do we take that information and give back the sort of identity and dignity to these items and to the people who made them? The other thing that sort of fortuitously happened, of course, this was 2022, so introduction of Philippines languages here at Harvard. I actually started doing some additional outreach to Filipino communities, just letting people know about these collections in September. We had an incredible former student, invited the former vice president of the Philippines, Leni Robredo, who actually, you can see featured there, looked at many collections from her home region. And what happened next for me was this real sense of conviction about not just leaving this information in the sort of academic published world, but what does it mean to engage further? And so that led to the creation of an online exhibition called Balik Bayan. Lady Orsal, Eileen Orsal, she named this exhibition. I was like, I don't know what to name it. Essentially what this was me taking a step back as a curator and not being the person to narrate what these collections mean. Instead, I invited 13 Filipino and Filipino-American artists, authors, scholars to choose any item or photograph of their choice and say anything they wanted about it, right? So you have some very personal stories about breast cancer. You have stories about revitalization. You have stories about the really conflicting difficulties of keeping textile production strong in the face of fast fashion. It led to an event celebrating Filipino culture in the museum that was hundreds of people. It led to student engagement with the collections. Lady Eileen Orsal actually put together this exhibition with students. It led to the inspiration for a fashion show in the Harvard Square Philippines Celebration Day. It led to the inviting and working with the consulate of a weaver from the Philippines to learn how to weave. And here's my last slide, if you allow me a few extra seconds. What's next really is up to you all, is what I would say. There are many, many, many collection items and things that have so many stories to reveal. There's not just one story, there's so many stories and histories, right? We've revealed that there was this war trophy. I mean, that needs to be grappled with and dealt with, right? On the right side, there is a famous anthropologist, historian, H. Otley Beyer, who worked in the Philippines. Some people called him the father of Philippines anthropology. That might be disputable now. He gave probably the largest collection to Harvard. But what's interesting is when he donated and sold many of his materials, he actually named someone else as the collector. He names this boy, Tuganay Pait, who's probably 10 to 15 years old. And he was clearly his assistant, okay? I just recently had a student reach out to me just in the past year and said that she found a manifest on a ship that shows him arriving in the United States in 1908, which is when the collection's donated. So he was here in the United States, this guy. We know his name, we know nothing about him. Someone write this story, okay? Someone. And then finally on the left, this flag that I keep bringing up, this was an early Philippines flag. It was donated by Colonel George H. Morgan, who served in both the Spanish-American and Philippine-American War. We don't know much else about it at this point, but this is that revolutionary flag that starts showing up in 98, 99 that Aguinaldo is associated with. And what is so special about this piece, I don't know if you can see, but that fabric there on the right, that is someone's curtains. Right? It is sewn together from pieces. It is hand-drawn, pencil and pen. Someone took apart their home to create this as an act of pride, right, and revolution. And so these stories are a way of kind of bringing up that past, but also giving Indigenous voices for the future. Thanks for allowing me.
Thank you all so much. So let me begin on a low note, but bear with me. It's going to get high very quickly. Like many of you, I was shocked in a not good way when I first came to Harvard and saw the state of Asian studies. Let me begin with the two obvious examples and then turn to the success stories, which I'll begin by saying a few negative things about as well. But I was stunned coming from the University of Chicago, which had certainly one of, some would say, the single best South Asian program in America, and it was almost non-existent at Harvard. I was shocked that Southeast Asian studies, almost non-existent at the University of Chicago. A very significant number of my courses were in Southeast Asia. The thing that struck me as odd, like of course they were. Like you want to learn about the world, you're learning about Southeast Asia. It was incredible, and I was stunned at the lack of anger and concern around me for those reasons. I did look, of course, at the success stories. China, Japan, and Korea, on the contrary, were very, very well represented. They each had their own center, which means they had lots of funding for students to do research on China, Japan, and Korea. They absolutely supported the major languages of those three areas, which meant students could take and get outstanding training in those three languages. They, of course, had a department home and lots of faculty positions, certainly compared to a lot of other programs in America. So that part, of course, I was happy to see and honored to be a part of. Even there, however, I was shocked in a slightly different way, which was the following. If there was a student coming into Harvard at either the undergraduate or graduate level, they had the support I just mentioned in terms of languages, research support, faculty on their committees to train them. But it was entirely possible back then, and I'm not that old, it's not that long ago, it was entirely possible for a student to come in and go through an entire 4 years at Harvard and never hear about Asia. If you wanted to hear about Asia, luckily there's a place you could do it, but we had made almost no impact on the curriculum at Harvard. You could take an economics course, well, you could get a degree in economics and never hear about Asia, never hear about indigenous theories in Asia, never hear about the workings of economic systems and all the complexities and conflicts and tensions in Asia. What you would think would be an obvious question, how do we rethink our theories accordingly, would literally never be posed in a course. And I use that as just one example among many. Most of the disciplines were unaffected by the study of Asia. I even mentioned this to show you how amazing this was in terms of how unangry people were about this. I was discussing this with I won't mention his name, but the dean of undergraduate studies at Harvard, and he said, well, Michael, even though you're a junior faculty, why don't you try to push for, I don't know if it would go anywhere, but try to push for I will try not to cough as I say this, non-Western requirement where every student at Harvard would be required to take a course on the non-West to therefore give diversity. And, and I said, no, that kind of bothers me. That would imply, just by the nature of the name of the requirement, that knowledge is Western, and you have to take one course in all of the rest of the world at some point during your Harvard career, and somehow that gives you a global knowledge. No, as I said to him, my goal is that Asia would just be a part of the curriculum because it's important, and you would not be learning theories without learning about theories from Asia. You would not be looking at history, period, without knowing about Asia. You would not be reading any form of methodology without realizing almost all of those arose from the 19th century in Europe during the colonial period, which was ongoing in America, and America was Harvard itself was an active part of continuing. Why wouldn't that be an inherent part of the curriculum? I was shocked by all of this, and again, shocked by the lack of shock around me. Now, let me start getting to a few good things, and then the hopefully very, very good future that I hope with all of our work awaits us. Some of what I've mentioned definitely has been changing and still has a long way to go, but Shigata, as you know, has played an instrumental role in developing South Asian studies. We now finally have an Institute for South Asian Studies, the Mittal Institute. We need a ton more faculty positions, a ton more funding, a ton more support, but at least it's beginning. I do think in the study of China, Japan, and Korea, we've made a lot of amazing hires of people who are really reaching out and rethinking the disciplines and affecting the disciplines. The big one, and boy, has that been mentioned repeatedly over the course of the day for obvious reasons, is Southeast Asia. And so let me say a few words about what we at the Asia Center are hoping to do for the study of Southeast Asia. When I say we, I'm meaning many of the people I've embarrassed already repeatedly. Jorge Espada, of course, our amazing associate director for the development of Southeast Asia, our extraordinary Southeast Asia initiative, which consists of faculty across all of the schools at Harvard, including, of course, Shigata himself, Jay, who's been instrumental in developing the entire Thai Studies program, and many others. For lack of time, I won't give their whole name, but I'm happy to say it is a huge group. When you look at across all of Harvard, there are a number of people, but I also include in the we the students. She was too humble to say, but I will embarrass her by saying Eleanor was a critical figure as an undergraduate here in finally getting Tagalog taught at Harvard. I'm not sure it would even be taught to this day without your extraordinary work. And the students, therefore, are a part of this we. The alumni are a huge part of this we. The larger world, including obviously everyone in this room who care about the study of Southeast Asia, are part of this we. So what I'm going to be laying out is calling on all of you to help us in what I'm going to say. I will lay out our current thoughts. I do so because none of this will be accomplished without the active help of all of you. That active help will involve concerns, questions, radical critiques. Those are all welcome. When you are building what we hope will be an extraordinary program, we will be making tons of mistakes. We will be relying on you for strong criticisms and suggestions, as well as active support and pushes against administrations that may not realize the significance of what we are doing. So let me lay out some of our hopes to, again, hopefully enlist all of you in the years to come to be a part of what we are hoping to do. So let me begin with some obvious things because you're already experiencing them. One of our immediate goals is we want to generate excitement and interest about the study of Southeast Asia. That is included doing tons of conferences, talks, opening up excitement about the study of Southeast Asia, getting people who walked into Harvard knowing nothing about Southeast Asia, getting them actively involved. We have done a huge outreach to the students, saying to the students, we're doing what we think are some good ideas. You, of course, have much better ideas than us. Come to us. You give us some suggestions for what we can do to help you in your initiatives. That is very much ongoing and will certainly be continuing. The study of languages, of course, is crucial. When I came to Harvard, we taught one Southeast Asian languages. Because it was so bad, it's been a dramatic increase. Now it's 4, which is percentage-wise pretty good, considering the number of languages in Southeast Asia. That's horribly low as a number. Not all of those are endowed, so we can't even tell students we can guarantee these courses will be taught over the course of your career. We hope, but they're not fully endowed yet, all of them. So I want all of the major Southeast Asian languages to be taught. That will require us to have absolutely a departmental home for Southeast Asian Studies. Will that mean a Department of Southeast Asian Studies? Will it be in a Department of Asian Studies? Will it be in a Department of East Asian and Southeast Asian Languages and Cultures? I am open to all of this. The conversations are ongoing, but we need a departmental home that will support all of these languages. We need faculty positions, people who will actively be mentoring our students, enabling us to have a concentration for our undergraduates and a graduate program in the study of Southeast Asia. And of course, this won't surprise you given what I've said, I want those hires to be among the sorts of people we've been hiring recently for the study of China, Japan, and Korea, people who are actively involved in rethinking the major disciplines by the work they are doing in Southeast Asia. Why would this matter beyond what I've already mentioned? Because if this works, and I'm confident this can work, I want it to be the case that any student coming through Harvard, regardless of their concentration, regardless of their home discipline, would be learning about Southeast Asia and all of Asia. I'm just focusing on Southeast Asia here because it's the big area we need to grow. They would be learning about Southeast Asia because it would be inherent in what they do. Now, you might correctly say, okay, but Michael, even if you get, several faculty positions, that's still a big ask. It is, but note what we also can do, and we are already beginning this initiative too. What about those many faculty members who, well, they've already by definition been hired, so they weren't trained in a program that, well, does what I'm hoping, where Southeast Asia was just a part of what they were learning? We start training them. So what if we start creating workshop series that would be so exciting people would want to sign up? And it would be saying to economists, political scientists, et cetera, come to us, spend some time doing these workshops, learn about Southeast Asia, learn about how it will change your thinking in a wonderfully exciting, powerful way. They will be then teaching courses in which Southeast Asia will be a part. They'll be inviting the then newly hired Southeast Asian faculty to give guest lectures. Eventually, out of that will come the key textbooks in economics, political theory, etc., that will just include Southeast Asia, a world that we stunningly still live in, where people will write histories of the emergence of capitalism that don't mention Southeast Asia, that will quickly just become unthinkable because, of course, that's silly. I mean, of course, because we'll be training a generation of students and even training the faculty who are beyond that age level, we'll be training them, so of course they would know that's silly. You would not even have people writing books about the origin of the novel looking at, Europe. They would know inherently that, of course, you've got to be looking at Asia, which is having a parallel phenomenon with incredibly important permutations. This is our hope. Now, does this sound insanely, crazily, absurdly utopian? I honestly think no. This is totally doable, and here's why. When you're doing program building, what you do is you get a few of what I just mentioned happening, and then it's a snowball effect. You create just a few incredibly exciting courses that bring students in. Those students call for more courses. When those courses get big, deans, believe me, begin to listen. When they get pushes by students saying, oh my gosh, there is support, you've got to do X, Y, and Z when you're building support, that happens. As that happens, are deans hesitant to give faculty positions in a growing area that, yes, will bring in students? They are really happy to do that. That grows. As those people come in, then we start actively building the sorts of programs at another level beyond what was possible before. And these things take on that accumulative snowball effect. I think we are looking at an incredibly, unbelievably exciting project where we will pull people in because they will want to be involved. That will grow and grow. And I'm hoping, and I honestly mean this as a realistic vision, within a few years, we will be talking about an extraordinary Southeast Asian program at Harvard. And my hope is, you think I'm really silly utopian? Well, I'm going to continue. I want that to be a vision for education around the world. If the textbooks are being written by this, if people are looking at Harvard as building this exciting program, it means so will other schools want to do the same. And if we're creating great textbooks, great, they can be spread throughout the world. And again, Southeast Asia will be a part of it. So I am very hopeful we can do this. I'm particularly hopeful because of this extraordinary community in this room. What you all are doing is already amazing. We very much look forward to the next several years where we work with you to build the kind of program I am absolutely confident we can build. Thank you for all that you've been doing today, all the work that has led to what you've been doing today, and thank you all going forward for all the help you can give us as we hopefully build an extraordinary program. Thank you.
Thank you. Alas, all good things must come to an end, but please join me in thanking our extraordinary panelists for so generously sharing their insights with us. And I believe now Michael's going to deliver some closing remarks, but
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you all so much. So I will begin, first of all, with a set of thanks I've given before, but how can one not continue it? So Tenzin, you have been absolutely incredible. The entire Asia Center staff have been absolutely amazing. Our deep thanks to Shugata for developing the idea for this and for organizing it so brilliantly. And let me say another word about Shugata, and then looking at all of you. When Shugata came to me with this idea, not surprisingly, like I'm sure all of you, when you got the invitation, I thought, oh my gosh, yes, let us do this immediately. But Shugata said something else too. Not only that this would be an extraordinary conference, which obviously I knew it would be, and boy, has it ever been, even beyond my wildest expectations. Shugata said something else to me too. He said, this will be a beginning. It too, it goes back to the earlier set of questions, it will go beyond what any one of us could ever do, but by bringing the community together, the entire community of Asian studies together, here now, the alumni, the larger networks that we're a part of, bring them together to rethink all of the major disciplines, the way knowledge has been created about Asia, including at a very significant place in that development, not always in good ways to put it mildly, at Harvard, and then also equally thinking together about where we need to go. If we can organize a conference like this with these themes, it will be the starting point of something extraordinary because we need to pull the community together, think through the past and all of the difficulties of doing so, but only by doing so can we realize the dangers that we have fallen into, and only by doing so can we build something extraordinary going forward. So I say this to say thanks to all of you who have been here, the presenters for the across-the-board brilliant presentations, all of you who were not the presenters but have been here asking these incredible questions, and I'll call on you to do exactly what Shugata's vision was saying from day one. Please continue with us as we continue this incredible work, because only together as an Asian studies community will we be able to rethink the disciplines, will be able to grow Asian studies in a way that will hopefully avoid the horrible dangers that Harvard has repeatedly fallen into, and together I think we can do something extraordinary, and that's because of Shugata's vision, because of the extraordinary staff of the Asia Center in organizing this, and for all of you, the presenters and audience members, for being with us in what we hope will be a long, multi-year, but unbelievably exciting endeavor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.